We've just had a great time together. Why should someone invest their precious time for this episode?
Well, time is our most precious resource. And this conversation is a shortcut to making the best use of your time in your personal and professional life.
Amen. Incredible. It's an investment. Just like the clients that work with you, it's an investment, not an expense. Today on the Coach U Show, we have a dear friend of mine. I feel like we've been brothers forever, and we're almost the same age. You've been an entrepreneur for 5 years, started 20 years as a journalist, wrote a book on epic business, and then came out just earlier this year with Epic Life, one of the few books that I've actually read cover to cover. And today, this is worth your time to listen because Justin has formulated a series of very simple but powerful principles. And I found myself reading his book, agreeing, because I've also been to these high-end masterminds and I've heard these same principles about mindset. Justin has run 6 days every week for the last 20 years, 3 or 4 miles, activating his mindset. He controls his time in the right way. He puts his family first. He writes a letter, a gratitude journal every morning to his wife, Sarah. He lives in abundance with the right people. He never sells. He's a buyer. He brings together the right people in a very exclusive network where it's about investment and not buying. And you would think that in an area that would seem as commodity like PR, how could someone like Justin, who runs BR Epic, be at the top of the game, yet be able to operate so effortlessly? Today, you are listening to this because you were meant to, because there is something here for you. Because of what Justin's saying, his hat says abundance, which says it all. So I'm super happy that Justin Breen is spending time with us today. Welcome, Justin.
Well, I can say this in all honesty, that's the best intro I've ever heard. It's a great honor to be here, and I'm really excited to hear how your mind thinks in this format. And our minds are very, very collaborative. I can already tell that. So I'm super excited to have this conversation with you and your audience.
I have a whole bunch of questions to ask you, if you don't mind. And one of the things, whenever I'm reading a book, like just to tell you a little bit of my childhood, I was kind of a loser in a way. I didn't have any friends. I didn't speak English for a while. So I read autobiographies of really successful people, like business people, not biographies, but autobiographies. And as I would listen to Lee Iacocca, or Ray Kroc talked about, McDonald's and grinding it out, or J. Willard Marriott, who started the Marriott chain, or, the General Mills, right? And Alfred Sloan and these guys, I would have conversations with them, even with these people that were dead. I read the Bible and I feel like I'm having conversations with Jesus, and I'm asking him questions to help better understand the fact that we get to talk to you. And so as I was reading your book, this book is great because it is not difficult to read. It's probably written at the 8th grade level intentionally.
Oh, less than that. Yeah.
Each chapter is like 4 pages, and then there's 3 simple bullets at the end of each of them. And I would ask myself, what question would I have on Justin? For example, you mentioned that every year you have a word, like a theme, such as like a global network 2 years ago. And this year in 2022, to be epic. And I'm thinking, and this is the best way to learn. You and I are both geniuses, I guess. And we're thinking, how do we learn? How do we absorb the most out of it? Not just to check the box to read the book, but like, how do I actually apply this and assimilate this in my life? So I wanted to ask you, well, what is your word for 2023?
Yep. So one of the chapters in the book is Name Your Years. So a great friend of mine, PR partner, Joe Martin, that was his idea. I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. I'll do that. And my top 3 strength finders are activate, maximize, achieve. So I am endlessly grateful for ideators like you, true visionaries. And then you say a good idea. I'm like, oh, I'll activate, achieve, maximize, achieve that into my life. So 2020 was global growth, 2021, no limits. This year, Epic Life, thus the name of the book, Epic Life. And then 2023 will be Networks. So 2 words, networks. And the new company is called Epic Networks. So networks, network works. And my whole life is, the companies, they're just a giant network of geniuses, and we're constantly introducing each other for mutual gain. So it's not, I guess they're obviously businesses, but really it's just collaborations with top people introducing each other. That's really what they are. So Networks is the theme for 2023.
Networks. I like that. And there's more power as you introduce more and more like-minded people. Before we started recording, Justin was already making introductions.
Immediately. Activate
and right. Strengths finders, Gallup, Enneagram, this other model I'd never heard of, but I'm about to spend the $150 to learn about the print network. Like, look at how Justin is categorizing people, because that's your time is so valuable. You have to categorize and filter out the time wasters and the boring people and the vampires and these negative people.
Yes.
The people I know, I mean, we have a lot of friends in common. They are also like, they're the friendliest people when you're accepted. But when you're on the outside, they say no to everything. They have such an incredible filter. And I see that with the way that you operate. Let me ask you, if you weren't a journalist, what do you think you would have done?
That's an interesting question, because for 20 years, I was an entrepreneur who happened to be a journalist. I didn't know that until I started first company a little over 5 years ago after job salary was cut in half and I couldn't find a job. But when I was a journalist or an entrepreneur who happened to be a journalist, the journalists who are journalists didn't understand what I was talking about, and I didn't understand what they were complaining about. So I don't know if I'm capable of being anything else but this, meaning like, I was just born with a story, and the purpose of my life is to be a connecting superhero for every visionary, abundance, investment mindset entrepreneur and share their stories with the world. So, I mean, I can make the argument that I was doing that before I was even born. I can explain what that means. I mean, you were talking to the authors of autobiographies when you were reading them. So I think you'll understand what I'm saying. I mean, you were talking to people in the Bible. So, I mean, my dad was, you've read the book. Thank you. But, my dad was 61 when I was born. My mom was 27. My dad, he died when I was 13. And he was a World War II hero, shot down multiple times in combat, many times without a parachute. After he died, I found the diary that he wrote from the Battle of the Hurtgen Forest, which was a very deadly battle towards the end of World War II. So that diary, one, it's my most cherished possession. Two, it's the most horrific, brilliantly written. I mean, it's just brilliant. Yeah. So I write exactly like he does. Exactly. I found it after he died. And then his writing style, it's different types of words, but I write the exact same way. And then when he was in his late 50s, he was driving on the highway and a drunk driver hit him. Drunk driver was killed. My dad broke every bone in his body, but survived. And then my mom was his nurse. And that's how they met. My mom was 27 when I was born. So my mom literally nursed him back to health. She just told me this the other day. When he woke up from like a coma, or however, when he first woke up after surgery, he saw her and he thought she was an angel. It was my mom. And then, so here I am. I mean, most of my days talking to people like us, top entrepreneur visionaries, I still haven't met anyone who has more hustle than my mom ever. I mean, she's the ultimate survive and thrive, no excuses. So I'm the product of that and that story. So I just think I was meant to, I don't know what else I could do. I mean, I think I was just meant to be this person. And I strongly feel that.
And your dad had so much grit. Those 3 journal entries that you published in chapter 1 about, in the war and getting shot down with no parachute and landing in a field and almost running into the stone wall. I feel that echoes what you were as a journalist, like for the Daily Camera, waking up at 1 a.m. and being an alley cat and hustling. But most journalists, people that are in PR, they're broke. They write articles. I know you have a team of writers. But what was it that made you feel, or what gave you the confidence to be an entrepreneur? And instead of like the arrogance and the blind ignorance of becoming an entrepreneur and failing, right? A lot of people, they leave their jobs. And you started your job 6 days, or you started you started your business 6 days after your 40th birthday and 2 months after you got laid off. What made you think, I hope I don't ask it in the wrong way, but what made you think that this was going to work?
Well, there's a 2-part answer to that. Usually, but not always, people like us, visionary wackadoos. I've actually trademarked that, but I have a shirt that says that. I should have worn that for this, but usually we marry or are with stabilizing humans. Not always, usually. And so my wife, if you think the opposite personality of us, that'd be my wife. Love, warmth, empathy, rules, calendar items, lists, patience. My wife, Sarah, is a pediatrician. And that's why the first thing I do every day is a grateful journal to her without her very bad situation. But so whenever I've had like really 5 great ideas in 5 years as an entrepreneur, maybe one a year. And so the first one was starting the first company. And when I asked her, would it work? She said yes. And that's all I needed to hear. So no matter what else anyone said, it didn't matter, because I mean, my wife doesn't say anything unless it, she's encouraging, but she doesn't like make up stuff. Okay. So that's one. And then 2, my litmus test is my dad was shot down multiple times in combat, many times without a parachute, and he got back in the plane. So if he can do that, my wife and I, our first date was the day before she started medical school. If my wife can get through that, my dad died when she was 13. So she raised 4 children. And then my youngest brother died of a drug overdose when he was 29. So if my mom can lose her youngest son and she won't complain about it, then okay, starting a company with 0 business background, I can do that. So those are my litmus tests.
Now, you said that you ranked last in empathy and second to last in inclusion. I've struggled with that same thing too, where other people say, Dennis, you need to play nicer with other people. How do you, I'm just being me, and I want excellence, and I don't like mediocrity. And if other people are going to turn in something terrible, I'm going to tell them. And Steve Jobs was known as an asshole because he wanted excellence. How do you balance that, or do you? 1,
again, best intro I've ever heard. 2, that's one of the best questions I've ever heard. And, what we're talking about here is the Gallup Clifton Strength Finders, Gallup, GALLUP. And there's 34 of them. And then 34 out of 34 in empathy. My partner for second company, by the way, is 3rd in empathy. That's very rare. And then my wife would probably be 1. And then I'm second to last in includer. There's a caveat dovetail to that. For people like you, visionary entrepreneurs, or people in general that don't make excuses, I have endless empathy, and endless. When I was a journalist and doing stories about like people that their best friend was shot and they wound up becoming a college football star or something like that. Endless empathy. Talking to parents after their child was killed in a car crash and they weren't complaining about it. They were continuing with their endless empathy, endless. For people making excuses, it's when you're raised by 2 parents that no excuses, successful, never make an excuse, it's very hard to understand anyone that would make an excuse. So that said, that's one part. And then my wife, who's full empathy, full inclusion, which I'm endlessly grateful for, she's taught me you have to say thank you to people. You have to be nice to everyone. And so, I try very hard, because our sons are 10 and 8, and definitely the people in our neighborhood and at the school, they're not like us. People like us are usually aliens within our own family community. I do the best I can. And I try very hard every day to be a nice, normal human being when the time calls for that.
So you had a chapter in your book which really resonated with me on high achievers don't like mediocre performers, and mediocre performers don't like high achievers. Can you explain that a little more?
Yeah. Again, how my brain works: dead last in empathy, second to last in includer, 3rd to last in ideation, which is very rare for people like us. Usually people like us are incredibly high in ideation. I'm almost dead last in it, which is actually a strength, because when I hear a great idea, my top 3 are activate, maximize, achieve. So I'm like, here's a genius who's like, here's a good idea. Or they're like, say something. I'm like, that's a good idea. I'll activate that. So that idea came from Nick Saban, who's, I would say the top college football coach of all time. He gave a speech and he said, high achievers don't like mediocre people, and mediocre people don't like high achievers. And what I have seen is, and I'm sure you have seen this and other high achievers have seen this too, as you put in the work, you take steps up higher and higher and higher, whether it's with things that you're up to, or economic gains, or networks that you're growing, or experiences in life. I have found, almost without exception, that high achievers are so excited for other high achievers, and people who aren't like that, whether you want to call it jealousy or anger or regret that they don't have the courage to do something like that. It's just a separation in mindset. And that's why it's so hard to have conversations where it's not someone like you, because it's a one-way conversation into nothing. So that's why most of my day is talking to people like you or spending time with my family, because otherwise it's just a bad use of everyone's time.
Yeah, the vampires. I like how you surround yourself with these like-minded sort of people. And people say stuff like that, but what I've witnessed is that A-level players attract A-level players. But the minute
Correct.
you let a B-level person into the team, they bring in C-level people who then bring in D-level people, and then it ruins your culture. So you have a tight team. You're very clear on how you screen people and how you have a standard for excellence. How do you maintain that?
Well, there's an interesting thing. Let me let my dog out for a second. But I wonder if your brain works like this too. It probably does. But my brain turns everything into patterns.
Yeah.
And that's high IQ and, pattern recognition. But what I've seen is when you start a company, there's a 4-step process. First, there's get to get, which I think everyone starts out as. So I reached out to 5,000 people to get first 5 clients while I was working full time at half the salary. That's fine. Okay, that's fine. I think a lot of people actually stay at that. And you can tell the people that think like that. You can tell that right away. Okay. So then there's get to give. So you're mostly trying to get still. You're giving a little, but you're mostly getting. Definitely most people stay at that. Then there's give to get. There's give to get. So you're mostly giving, but you're still trying to get a little back. And I would say 99.9% of the world stops there. So business owners, consultants, humans, they stop at that.
It is page 123 in your book. These 4 stages.
Oh, thanks for that.
Quoting your book.
Yeah, and then the 4th stage is where we're at, which is rare. In our world, it's not rare anymore, but in the regular world, it is. But it's give to give, but only to the people who get it. And so for people like you, I'll endlessly give, regardless of whether I get anything in return. And I think it's finding those people that have that mindset who will just give to give, but only to the people who get it. And then that's like a screen filter, because like you said, someone who doesn't get it, it's not a good introduction to someone who gives to give, but only to the person who gets it. Because if someone doesn't get it, it just doesn't match the filter. It doesn't match the mindset. So I guess the best way I found that is, one, being in the right rooms with the right people, right entrepreneur groups. The second one is if someone asks, what do you cost or charge within the first 5 or 10 minutes, that's an immediate tell that they're just not. This is how I learn in real time, by thinking. The third tell is when they start talking about material things, like where they just focus on revenue or employee count, office space. It's all this material stuff, and they don't lead with anything meaningful. I've noticed that as well.
So we have a couple thousand agencies in our group that follow us, and a lot of them, maybe they just started because of COVID with the push to digital. And they look at someone like yourself and say, well, it's easy for Justin to say that because he's super well networked. And because of this, his referral base, and he's so well known that he can just screen for the people. Like when you said you raised your minimum to 10,000 at one point, and then you raised it higher than that. Like I noticed the same thing too. This is a dirty secret that you and I know that other people that maybe aren't further enough along with their agency or business know. The clients that pay us 50,000 a month are less demanding than the ones who
way less demanding.
A month.
Less demand. Yeah, the less people pay you, the more problems they cause. But that's what I mean. High achievers appreciate what it takes to become a high achiever, and then the people complaining about, why are they like that and I'm not? That's what I mean. That's someone who doesn't get it. So what separates entrepreneurs from humans and the people that complain, whatever that world is actually, if you could answer this, I'd like to know. If you don't want to, that's fine, but I would like to know. But I haven't met one person. You already told me about your childhood a little bit, but I haven't met one person like us that hasn't overcome at least one of the following 4 things. Most are 2 or 3. And then the really successful ones, that I found that most of them are all 4 now. At least 3. So the 4 things that separate entrepreneurs from everyone else are bankruptcy or potential bankruptcy, 2, depression, 3, the highest level of anxiety, and 4, likely and or possible traumatic experiences as a child or young adult. So I'm 3 of the 4. I talk to a lot of all 4s, but so, humans, consultants, business owners, those 4 things are excuses. People like us, it's like, okay, well, I'll figure it out. That's what separates entrepreneurs from everyone else.
I have 4 of 4. I'll tell you something I've never said publicly.
4. That's why
a lot of people know that well, I believe it's the refiner's fire, right? It's the crucible that refines the ore, whatever you want to call it. So a lot of people know that I didn't speak English until I was 6. So I was made fun of. I went to the principal's office. These kids say, if you really like somebody, tell them this. And I would say that and get in trouble because I didn't know what the words meant. I was put in the special needs. There's an area for the kids. Back then it was called retarded. That's where I was put.
Right.
And they treated
There
me
you
as
go.
retarded because I didn't speak English.
One genius IQ.
And I wanted to tell them, you ever have these Americans where you don't know what the word is? You don't know what that word means. So they yell it louder at you, thinking that you're going to understand what that word means.
Yeah, that
I just don't know what the word means. I'm not dumb, right? So I got good at math and I competed in math competitions and I decided I was going to learn English. I was going to speak English so well. I was born in Ohio, so it's not like I was born in China. But I was
no, I was not China. Oh man, that's funny. Ay. Keep going.
So I just made it my thing. I had this chip on my shoulder. I believe all the really successful entrepreneurs, like a buddy of mine went to school with Elon Musk, and he was telling me last night about how Elon Musk was made fun of in South Africa, which then created fuel for the fire because Elon wanted to prove him wrong. And now look what's going on. So I wanted to prove these other idiots wrong, these kids that were making fun of me. And kids, they mean no harm, but they're just so honestly mean, right? So I studied the English dictionary for several hours a day. I read 8 to 10 hours a day, every day, weekends, summers. I did this for almost 30 years. I represented California in the National Spelling Bee in 1988 in Washington, D.C.
You were in the Scripps. I'm
the Scripps Howard National Spelling Bee.
What did you finish in that?
Quarterfinals.
You made it to the quarters. Is that on TV? Is that part on TV?
That was, 30 some years ago. I'm sure if you Google it, you'll find it there. Okay. I have the press clippings that have now turned yellow. And my mom, she's 80, so she's got them framed on the wall where it shows me there. And you know how parents, they love to clip the awards, that kind of stuff. But a lot of people know about that. And they say, oh, Dennis is good at math and he was a high achiever because of his childhood, because his parents both had PhDs and he had this, whatever great environment.
Are you an only child?
Yeah, I'm an only child. Now, let me tell you the one thing which complements the 4 that you mentioned, the 4 adversities or struggles that I've never told anybody. I was nearly put in a foster home because I was beaten when I was a child.
By whom?
And I didn't know that because, the Asian parents, they really want you to be successful. And the Asian parents are always like comparing on which kids got the 800, perfect 1600. And so I was beaten. And one time there was blood that was showing through my shirt on the back. And the principal said, hey, what's going on? And I would tell him, oh, I fell down or something like that. But I was beaten. And basically we had a meeting where, my parents and the principal and another counselor was there. And they said, you either need to go to counseling and do this thing, or we're going to put Dennis in a foster home. Oh. And so that was one of those that, that hits loneliness, that's rejection, that's all these things where you feel worthless, where you feel like you're not even loved, because I had a 1580. I had a near perfect SAT, and it's 2 questions. I had a perfect math at least, but I had a 780 verbal. And this was back when the SAT was 1600. I think it's like 2400 now, something like that. Yeah. So, but there are these other kids that had perfect 1600s, and I had it rubbed in my face. These other kids that were perfect 4.0s. I'm like a 3.7, not bad, right? I'm not some like drug dealing hooligan, know nothing. I just wasn't at the very, very top. There were kids that were better. And so I wasn't good enough. And even to this day, I'm 48. I still feel like I'm not good enough. And that's pushed me. I see a lot of entrepreneurs. A friend of mine, he's the funder of Best Buy and Costco. He put the money in. He's a billionaire. And to this day, he works day and night, 70, 80 hours a week. He started another hedge fund. And he does it, I think, to shut out the loneliness. So instead of turning to drugs and alcohol.
Well, that's what it is. Yeah.
So I definitely see some of these most successful entrepreneurs are successful on the business level, but you look at their family and it's shambles. I love how you have these 2 rules every day. One is, did I do something amazing with my family? And number 2 is, did I enhance my global network? How amazing that you put number 1 and that ties in. Your whole system is sound and it's cohesive. The daily gratitude for Sarah, how you spent, of all the things that you could listen to when you go on your 3 to 5 mile run 6 days a week, you're listening to what's technically motivational speaking mindset stuff, but it's really how we program our brain. You and I know that the top performers out there are listening to these things that these average people say, well, why are you listening to that hoo-ha, motivational speaker fluff? Right. No, the mindset is the most important thing because it drives everything else. And that's how I was able to come out of these bad things that happened in my childhood, because I knew by reading Napoleon Hill or Dale Carnegie or all those classic things that I could turn anything negative, or, Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning.
That's number 1. That's number 1.
I believe in existentialism, which is the idea that whatever situation you're in, you have control over it. No matter how horrible that thing was that happened, you can be a victim. And yes, that bad thing happened. So a good friend of mine died 2 weeks ago. That bad thing happened. I can't deny it, but I know that it's my choice on what I want to do. And I see like that's what you do as an entrepreneur. You've had ups and downs, but I would argue, I've guessed that your mindset is what allowed you to overcome that and be resilient when otherwise you could have fallen down the excuse hole.
Well, you said this is why I listen. I always listen to the show when I run because I always learn so much from the hosts. And I'm not an emotional person, but man, what you were telling me there about your childhood. I mean, that's what I mean. My empathy is like I just feel so terrible about that, but also inspired because you didn't make excuses and turned it into this. And then you were telling me about your friends and the funders. And so my brain, again, it turns everything into patterns. So this is what entrepreneurs are. And this is why I wrote the second book and what you said about how I filter things with my family first. This is why I wrote it, because like I genuinely feel people like us want this. They just don't know how to do it. So here, this is what entrepreneurs are. Entrepreneurs are the most damaged people, the very most, with the best coping skills. So the most damaged with the best coping skills. So there's a lot of damaged people, but they don't have coping skills. So they turn to drugs or they go to prison or they don't have the high enough IQ or whatever. So that's what entrepreneurs are. So the most trauma, the most things that could have gone wrong, but they have this ability to. What I see with, not always, definitely not always, but many times what I see, those coping skills create massive company, massive wealth, massive employee count, massive office space, massive number of work hours, like your friend. And then not always, but many times at the expense of anything meaningful in their lives. No family, multiple divorces. And I have learned, and I know, because being a journalist, you don't get into journalism for employee count, office space, like all that stuff's foreign concepts to me. You become a journalist because you like, writing about cool people, all that in purpose. So I have learned that I am a dad who happens to be an entrepreneur, not an entrepreneur who happens to be a dad. It's a fundamental difference. And that's why I start every day with a grateful journal to my wife, because I don't want to forget that ever.
I like how you're so principled, not in a didactic sort of like closed-minded way, but you run with for example, what you just mentioned about how entrepreneurs are often the most broken people with the best coping skills. I've translated that into your misfortune is your fortune.
Correct.
And these create other opportunities where you identify with other people. Like I look at what you were saying, like Nick Saban, the coach of Alabama, you mentioned he was 74, and these other top coaches and performers are in their 70s.
Yeah.
And think about the level of misfortune that someone in their 70s has encountered and what we can learn from them.
There's a couple of things from that. One, my dad was 61 when I was born, 61. And so I was raised by someone who had suffered endlessly, whether through his World War II, Korea. He came from nothing. He was born in 1916. So I was thinking about this the other day. So 1916, that's the middle of World War I. Then there was the Spanish flu in 1918. He grew up Jewish in the suburbs of Chicago. Tremendous anti-Semitism. His parents escaped Russia, the pogroms in Russia, and they didn't speak any English. So he and his three brothers all served actively. My dad was really smart. So the Irish mafia guy who rented out where my grandparents lived and the kid that my dad and his brothers lived, he funded my dad to go to law school because he knew he had a brain. My dad's best friend was killed in a famous mafia hit when I was 5. That's one of my first memories is my dad trying to hide us because they thought they were going to shoot him. So I was raised by someone who had survived all of that. And then I got the full like wisdom from that. All that wisdom and that thankfulness for being alive and then having a family. So that was my foundation. And then Dan Sullivan, who's the co-founder of Strategic Coach, that's one of the entrepreneur groups I'm in. I'm sure a lot of the audience knows what that is or is members of that. Dan is, as of this recording, I believe he's 78 years old. He's been a coach for 40 years. And Dan, in his mid 30s, was bankrupt and divorced on the same day. bankrupt and divorced on the same day. I was just talking to him about this, and like, just think about that. I only laugh because, like, what can you say? Bankrupt and divorced on the same, like, that's like, and then this, this is what I mean. Like, that's in all four. So like, and that's, now he's leading arguably the best entrepreneurial group in the world. So like that, but I think that's just what it takes. I just think to get to that level, like, you have to just understand and endure that type of suffering in some capacity.
What do you say to a young adult who hasn't endured something like that yet, but is thinking, man, I don't want to have to go through that to be successful?
Oh, man. Well, one, that's an interesting question, because I talk to people of all ages. And when I say people, I mean visionaries like us, even some in their late teens, because they're like children of people like us. And almost without exception, they have endured something like that. Like, it's not, if you know someone that hasn't overcome at least one of those four things, the bankruptcy or potential bankruptcy, two, depression, anxiety, or likely and or possible traumatic experiences as a child or young adult, and become a successful visionary entrepreneur, I'd like to meet that person. I haven't met them yet. If I did meet that person, I would say, I hope you don't have to go through those things. I'm three of the four. I haven't had, knock on wood, I haven't had to worry about bankruptcy or potential bankruptcy. I don't think I will. And I know I would not do that to my family. I wouldn't do it. But it's like, I think it's a requirement. And I'll even double down on that. I agree. Where I grew up and where I live now, I would describe it as an upper middle class, fairly wealthy area. And when I was growing up, I was always thinking about like purpose and writing about cool people, and people drive like nice cars around here and things like that. But the first question they always ask is, what do you cost or charge? Like, that's why I went global, because I had to find people that understood what I was talking about. So this entire area is like playing not to lose as opposed to playing to win. And I think a lot of that is because they haven't endured any of those four things in any high level capacity. So they can't, like, they could never even deal with that. They could never even turn something like that into something bigger, because they're just not capable of handling it.
Yeah. They've never been challenged. So how do they even know?
Exactly. They've never been challenged. And if they were, it would be and so that's why you see in wealthier areas so much drug use and that kind of situation, because they don't know how to deal with the competition.
Yeah. Now, you've been around a lot of successful people. You pay to join these masterminds that are 25K or even 50K.
Oh, yeah.
But when you're with these people, Justin, what questions are you asking?
Man, that is a good question. So I don't ask a lot of questions because there's two reasons why. One, I like to be the dumbest person in the room. And two, maybe being trained as a journalist or just how I am, I'd rather listen and just listen to people talk. So the only time I really ever say a lot of things is during these type of formats. I'd rather just listen. The one question I do usually ask, if someone is talking about material things or things that they're up to, I'll ask, like, how's your personal life or how's your family? I will ask that. The other question I always ask is, what's your Colby score? I always ask that.
You're the pattern matcher.
Yeah. Because if people don't know what that is, KOLB, it's your brain strength. That's how you take actions, how you take action. The most important number for me, and then for any visionary really, is the quick start number. In 5 years as an entrepreneur, my firms have partnered with one person, one under a 7 quick start. It goes up to 10. I'm guessing you're at least an 8 or 9. I don't think you're a 10, but I think you're an 8 or 9. Maybe you are a 10. Maybe.
I think it's an 8 or 9.
8 or 9. Yeah, you don't. A 10 is Dan Sullivan's a 10. I think you're probably an 8 or 9, just based on how you talk and how you think. But that's the one thing, because like, I'm a high fact finder, and what I have found is that's the ultimate simplifier into knowing who I'm talking to, is that 4-number score. And then my stabilized human wife, who is an 8742 Colby, she's like, you need to stop identifying people by numbers. But it's easier for me to
people.
So it's like if you told me that you've taken it before, so like I would be like, oh, Dennis, he's a 3393, and then my partner here's Mark Fujiwara, he's a 1596. So that's how I do my intros, because then you know who you're talking to.
Yeah.
Yep.
Amazing.
Thanks,
Justin. Who is Epic Life for?
Well, you're definitely a genius, because you're a simplifier. with how you ask questions. So I talk to 1 to 2 people like us every single week that have let entrepreneur life destroy their family life or prevented them from having anything meaningful in their life. So the book is How to Build Collaborative Global Companies While Putting Your Loved Ones First. So it's for people like us who don't know how to do that, but they want to. And there's 2 things from that. One, I know that's what people like us want, because every time I talk about this, they're like, people are like, that's what I want. How do I do that? So that's why, here's step 1, step. And then 2, this is a message I believe so strongly in, because the world doesn't need your friend to work 70 hours, 78 hours a week. That's a person there should be more meaning for someone like that. Because that's a person that's created so much meaning and there's no meaning for themselves. That's someone who should have more meaning for themselves. That person you just described, the 70 to 80 hours a week, that he's still doing that.
He's a billionaire.
But at what cost? What cost? Everything. So, right. And I was talking to one of my friends in Abundance 360. That's another group I'm in. And he's a 9 quick start. He's a genius. He runs a major, like a cell phone company in California. And he's like, yeah, that's just a Pyrrhic victory. I've thought a lot about it and asked a lot of people. I go, is someone like your friend, is he capable? Or is that what they want? Do they want something meaningful? And without exception, people are like, yes, that's what they want. They just don't know how to do it, or they don't know how to turn it off. So that's why I wrote it. That's who I wrote it for. And I can't tell you how strongly, because it's just sad. Those are the saddest people I know by far.
Yeah. And this friend of mine, he has the largest divorce settlement in the history of New York.
Right. So right. Send him the book.
He has a new house that's 100,000 square feet. It is gigantic in the Hamptons.
Send him the book.
Yeah.
I'm serious. That's why I wrote it. My life is very simple. People think I do all this stuff. I don't. I spend time with my family and I talk to people like you and I connect them. And it's endlessly gratifying to do both of those things. And it makes me really happy to do those things. It makes me endlessly happy. And I'm so grateful to do that. And I just think more people, if they just focused on meaningful things, that all this other great stuff would happen as well.
I see a lot of people who are very smart that deal in complexity, but true genius is what you're doing, is simplifying life lessons. We spend so much time learning how to make money and do business and learning these particular skills, but we spend so little time understanding the mindset and understanding how to think about things and understanding how to be the person you need to be to attract the right people. And the fact that Justin has his family first and surrounds himself with amazing people, he operates by a simple set of principles that helps him classify who he wants to work with, is something all of us can learn. I spent 90 minutes reading this book. And the reason I saw this, I saw other people that I respected that were reading this book. And I said, that's something I need to go check out. I bought the book. I saw the foreword was by Peter Diamandis. And I thought, there's something here. I read what other people had to say. I saw you on a bunch of other podcasts talking about the book. And I said, I need to be able to get inside the mind of Justin Breen. I feel like you came into my life in a selfish, like I might say it selfishly, at exactly the right time for exactly what I needed. And this has meant so much to me. I feel like everything happens exactly at the right time, whether we know it or not. It's a God smack, God wink moment. So I'm so grateful. Not a God smack. That's like Joe.
Good band. It's a good band. Yeah. Oh man. I found that people like us were like little kids. We appreciate little jokes like that. So thank you. It's fun.
So grateful for you, Justin. Any final words or questions that you wished you were asked?
That's interesting. That's how I always end every interview. I've interviewed thousands and thousands of people. I always ask who your parents were or where you come from, because if you know where you come from, then you know where you are and you know where you're going. And then the question I always ask class is there something else you'd like to add, something that'd be good, because sometimes people they want to say something, but they were never presented with a way of doing that. So that's awesome. That's I think you're the second or third person to ever do that. So again, my whole life is simple formulas and patterns, but I just keep writing bigger checks to be in smaller rooms, but the people in those rooms are making bigger impacts. So bigger check, smaller room, bigger impact. That allows me to spend biggest check, biggest investment in the smallest room, which is my family, where I can make the most impact. So bigger check, smaller room, bigger impact, biggest investment, smallest room, family, biggest impact.
I love that. You are an entrepreneur who has his head on straight. We need more Justin Breens. We need more people thinking like you. Justin, where can people find you?
Well, this has been a tremendous discussion. I'm very thankful for this. I'm on LinkedIn, and the website is brepicllc.com.
Thank you so much, Justin. You are awesome. I wish I could reach out through the screen and kiss you.
Give you a big hug,
Give you a
man.
big hug.
Man, you got my empathy on full high right now, man. So thankful.